You came to me the other day and you were like, I really want to talk about Beyblade. And I was like, what? Like, what? No way. Come on. And then over the course of the conversation, you convinced me that we need to talk about Beyblade. In this episode, we're going to attempt, I think, to convince people that this is the most exciting game.
Gavin, we aren't attempting. We are going to convince people.
That's fair.
That
okay.
This is the most exciting game.
By the end of this video, we will convince you that Beyblade is the most exciting game to be released in decades?
A millennium.
Distraction makers.
Okay, so at first glance, my skepticism came from, I have a pretty clear definition for what makes up a game, right? It's a meaningful decision with an uncertain outcome and measurable results. And my skepticism was, this seems like there's an uncertain outcome and measurable results, right? The tops are spinning. One of them will be not spinning by the end of the game. And the person who's still spinning wins. That's pretty easily measurable. Where my skepticism came in was in the meaningful decision category. So once you sort of started explaining to me all of the meaningful decision aspects of this, that's when I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. So let's go through and explain the meaningful decisions as part of putting together your Beyblade, as well as launching it, and some of the maybe some of the sort of adjacent tournament strategy, and convince everyone that this is the game that they should be checking out.
So there's 3 different parts for each Beyblade. There's the blade, that's the top part,
which is metal.
It's metal. It's hefty. So yes, there's the blade, there's the ratchet, that's the sort of middle part, and then there's the bit, and that's the bottom.
This is the part that it spins on.
Yeah, that's the part it spins on. So only 3 parts. The back of the box here has all sorts of different stats. So if we look at these stats, there's attack, defense, stamina, and some of this says dash and burst. There's height.
The thing that was really interesting to me is we were discussing the choices you can make when you're building your Beyblade and how that is sort of carried through to what we have referred to as the strategy circle before. So in the strategy circle, you have sort of 3 different strategies. You have rush, you have economy, and you have defense. Rush means you're trying to win the game sort of as quickly as possible. Economy means you're trying to sort of outlast your opponent and win in the late game. And defense means you're trying to stop your opponent from winning. Effectively, win now, win later, or stop your opponent from winning. The choices that you could make as part of your Beyblade lined up pretty exactly with the strategy circle.
Yeah, and in fact, in doing a lot of research for before we got into this, I was noticing in the actual Beyblade sort of communities, they would usually refer to their own Beyblades basically right in line with the strategy circle. They have different names for it, and they also have something that they consider like a balance Beyblade type.
But the strategy is still the same.
But the strategy is still
you're
the
either
same.
trying to knock your opponent out quickly, or you're trying to outlast your opponent, or you're trying to what is the defense one?
The defense is usually that like you can take a hit pretty decently, but it's not going to knock you down completely. So you're able to like take more hits without being completely pushed out of the arena, I believe.
Right. Like as you're getting hit by your opponent's top, you're actually slowing them down, right? You're sort of absorbing that impact in some way.
Yeah.
And there's even one that I thought was particularly interesting, which was a top that spins more when it hits their opponent. It was almost a parasitic type strategy, which seemed quite strong.
So there is a top that's out currently that's called the Cobalt Dragoon, which is apparently, a left spinning top. So basically anytime that you end up hitting it, it actually helps it spin.
Right.
Yeah. It self-spin as it's in an arena starting with no spin power whatsoever.
Yeah, it wasn't spinning at all, right?
Yeah.
And then it would start spinning as the other tops were hitting it. It was crazy.
Which is really, really interesting. And with these 3 different parts, it's not surprising that there's going to be different physics differences, I guess, depending on how heavy your top is, what the different shapes of the bottom is, and stuff like that.
Well, also there's a meta that can evolve because you have a strategy circle, which means that rush typically beats economy typically beats defense, and defense typically beats rush. So if you have a top that is designed to knock your opponent out of the ring as quickly as possible, if you then have a top that is able to take those hits or able to defend against that in some way, whether that's taking the hit or just
being able to move around,
or just being out of the way, or however you're going to have a defense strategy, you theoretically are going to win against a rush strategy more often. If your goal is to have an economy strategy, meaning I'm going to outlast my opponent, well, if somebody has a rush strategy, they're trying to knock you out, so you're not going to be able to outlast them. So In that way, the strategy circle is intact, which is pretty fascinating. It's not to say that there isn't any randomness. There's clearly randomness in what's going on here, but
any sort of a physically based like skill game is,
sure,
I think, just going to have randomness in general.
And I think the important part about this is understanding, like, okay, well, there's a curve in terms of the returns to skill when randomness is introduced into a game, and the question is, where does this game fall on that graph, right? It's tough to know, but what we do know is that there is some amount of meaningful decision in terms of building your top. Now that we sort of discussed the sort of strategy involved in designing your Beyblade, let's talk about the different ways to launch it, because this also is a skill factor.
Okay, so there's technically 3 launchers, but only 2 really matter. This is your basic launcher. This just comes with all Beyblades. I think it's called a ripcord launcher. It's very similar to all the original Beyblade launchers. And then there's this new string launcher, which I don't know if other Beyblades had this, but I didn't have this as a kid, and I think this is really cool because I would always hit things with the ripcord whenever I yanked it too much.
Right.
Yanked it too much.
There's some differences there. Like the string launcher, you might not be able to get as much force with it because of how it launches, because it doesn't actually like fully extend. There are different ways that you could launch the Beyblade. What some people have seemed to find in the Beyblade community, the Beyblade meta, there are a few key sort of launches that I guess the community has sort of hovered around and generally agreed upon as being like these are actual strategic decisions that you're making when launching. That would be the drop launch, which is when you're just straight above the arena. There's the counter launch, which if I'm familiar with it, you're basically trying to make sure that you actually start by going counterclockwise in the arena. And then the reverse X dash, which is a little bit more complicated. And I think that's about where you're specifically landing in the arena in order to avoid your opponent coming around a certain direction and hitting you.
And you're sort of given full autonomy as to like, sort of like you're given autonomy as to where you're launching within your sort of side of the stadium, right? Like,
yeah. So there's apparently what is considered a B side and what they call the X side. And that is based off of the logo, so the actual stadium.
Based on just it says Beyblade X on the stadium, whether you're standing on the X side or the B side is whether you're launching from the X or the B side.
Right, and this matters because if all tops are sort of generally going in that same direction and spinning in that same direction, if you end up starting on the X side or the B side, that it sort of depends on whether you are the aggressor or you are the one that's being chased in a way.
Oh, and right, and you would make that decision based on what type of Beyblade you built, right?
And deciding on if your opponent is using maybe a more aggressive Beyblade or something, they might want to be more on the one on the other side, right? So that they're not being chased.
Yeah, and this would be similar to maybe making the decision if you want to play first or draw in Magic or something, but usually in Magic you're going to want to go first just because the advantage is quite a bit higher. Where here, it depends on your strategy, and sometimes when you're playing something like Draft in Magic, you might choose to draw instead, just depending upon, very rarely, but it is possible. Okay, so based on how you're launching, you are also thinking about how you're trying to beat your opponent, right? So there are different scoring mechanisms to how you either knock your opponent's top out of the stadium or how the game ends, right? So if the tops, like one of the two tops just stops spinning in the arena, stadium, whatever.
The base stadium.
The base, sure. You'll get only 1 point. Yeah. If you knock the other top out of the stadium into one of the sort of like easier to knock out categories, you get 2 points. If you break your opponent's top, meaning the pieces come apart.
It's called a burst.
A burst.
Yeah.
You might not actually break it, but it comes apart.
Yeah.
You get 2 points. If you knock your opponent out into what's called the
extreme finish zone.
The extreme finish zone, you'll get 3 points. And the thing that's interesting about this is that the anatomy of the stadium is different for each of these sort of victory conditions.
Yeah, scale's pretty fairly based off of the score. Although the burst is wild because I feel like that's the most exciting thing to see happen. So the fact that scores less is kind of silly because you have the expectation that it would give you more. This is
a big tangent for just a second.
Okay.
Indulge me for a moment.
Sure.
I found out the other day that jousting.
That's what this is.
Right. No, it's interesting. There's a theatricness to jousting, right?
Uh-huh.
Like you're not just trying to knock the other guy off the horse. There's also pieces of armor. There were even spring-loaded pieces of armor you'd wear on the front that when somebody hit your shield, it would launch it into the air. So there was a whole theatricalness to jousting with someone and knocking them off their horse. There are pieces of armor that would sort of explode into a bunch of pieces, or like the shield would get launched. There was like a showmanship part of it. And so you bringing up the top actually breaking apart, I'm like, oh, it's basically jousting, right?
And it's interesting because that was I'm not as familiar with Beyblade Fusion and Beyblade Metal and some of those, but the original Beyblades, from what I remember, is that it was pretty uncommon that your Beyblade would just like break apart. Right. And if I remember correctly, you had to actually use a whole tool to even put the weight disc on the Beyblade. Like you had to use it's almost like a wrench type thing.
So it was tough to assemble and disassemble.
And I think that it made it pretty sturdy if they're bouncing into each other all the time. And here it seems like they almost leaned into that theatrics where it feels pretty. I mean, you've held it. It's like the weight disc at the top, the blade is like sturdy metal, but everything below this feels like that could just like fall off any minute now.
A little bit, sure.
And but we spun it quite a few times and they were fine. But
I do wonder if there's a strategy there to score extra points. Maybe there's a top that is better at breaking other tops apart
somehow,
or something, right? Because I think if you hit that ratchet and knock it a particular way, your top the other Beyblade's more likely to fall apart. So interesting. Okay, so you might then modify your strategy, making meaningful decisions again to change how you're scoring points. The last factor, the X factor, if you will, is what's called the accelerator rail, and this was the thing that really made me go, okay, we got to talk about this.
The X-Rail is essentially this plastic green piece that is kind of around the arena that has a lot of these little tiny ridges, these little plastic ridges, little teeth. What's new on the Beyblade, on these bits, is that these have little tiny grooves and little tiny teeth. And these teeth are perfectly sized to go and lock in to the X-Rail. The minute it locks in to the rail, it actually speeds it up, which is really actually very cool to see in person.
In a similar way to how like rockets will launch themselves into space faster. Like you'll orbit a planet and you'll come around it at a particular angle that on the backswing, when you come back the other way, you're actually going much faster than when you started, right? It's giving it this almost like hyperspeed boost to hit the other top to try to knock it out of the arena. It's to me, I was like, oh, okay, that's actually pretty wild.
Honestly, I think that if you want some nice entertainment, I think this stadium was very cleverly designed to capture that particular feeling that people, I think, remember Beyblade's feeling like if they're looking at it through nostalgia, or want it to feel like if they're looking at it through the anime.
All right, and the point structure also backs this up in that the accelerator rail is the thing that you're going to be using to knock somebody out to get the extreme finish, right? The big KO where you're knocking them up like, over the side and get the 3 points.
Perfectly spaced to either knock someone into the corner pocket or to knock into the extreme finish. And oftentimes people will hover sort of in that center area. It's hard to see, but there's like a little tiny divot in the center of the arena.
Kind of moves you towards the center a bit.
Yeah. And so if there's a top that sort of is hovering towards the center, a more aggressive top that's going to be moving a lot more and going towards the outer edge of the arena, if it lands on the accelerator rail, it just lines it up perfectly to go and smack it.
Yeah. The biggest takeaway here for me is, I guess there's two. There's two major takeaways here in terms of game design. One is I love that it leans into the things that are exciting, not only with sort of the design of the arena, but also with the points structure, and that you are rewarding the most exciting things. Incentivizing players to build their tops in a way that will do the exciting thing. And the second part is I like how they have modified the sort of play space, right? Like sort of the battle space as you would. And I think that is something that a lot of other games could learn from. I think there's a lot of opportunity to create interesting arenas, to add another layer of variance to the game. And bringing in sort of those overlapping systems of randomness here, where if you're playing on different stadiums, that completely changes the top you would use, the way you would launch it. It changes all of that based on which stadium you're playing in.
Completely agree. I think that what I find really interesting is that if we, call back to the strategy circle, and you were saying that, a rush strategy ends up beating an economy strategy, which is just trying to outlast the player. But what I find really interesting is that the stadium is actually what allows those archetypes to really thrive and exist in the way that you expect them to exist. And so if the econ strategy is to outlast, you're probably heavier, you're probably hovering around the middle of the stadium because of your weight. It's a perfect spot for a rush strategy, Beyblade, to basically go hit the accelerator rail and knock you out, or have the opportunity to knock you out. And so whether or not, it previously, where it was mostly just an attacking one, just kind of tapping into something, this sort of stadium built that actual strategy as a possibility. So just small things like that I just think are super interesting. And I honestly, I think the arena made this version of Beyblade what it is. Yeah. Thank you to my brother Seth for helping get us prepared to talk about Beyblades, informing me all about the latest Beyblade metas and how the actual new version of Beyblade X functions. And thank you to the North California Beyblade Discord community as well.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and a subscribe down below. If you want to continue the discussion, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description.
You think they're going to have like a Chandra Beyblade at a certain point, like Magic the Gathering?
Oh, there's
Beyblade?
definitely going to be universes beyond Beyblade. It's going to go the other way, though, where Beyblades will be in Magic.
Oh, if they do Beyblade
Sensei's
Magic.
Divining Top.
Sensei's Divining Top?
Beyblade?
Yeah. It's right there.
Hey.
Come on, Wizards. Your move. What's up?
Let it rip.